this immediately clicked to me whenever we first started adopting web components is like I was playing with Docker at the same time, and I am a front-end developer, so like please tell me if you know more than me about Docker, which is probably everyone in this room. But it made sense to me just conceptually, the two. Like they're both these contained pieces of front end and back end. And it just makes sense that they could control each other. Or at least web components could control microservices. And the reason why is because, I come from the land of Drupal. So it's this is what you get. And I've never liked the monolithic approach. The broken down discrete pieces make way more sense to me. But I totally get it. Like you get insane user permissions and roles and stuff out of the box with these monoliths. I get why they're useful. But this is where my head's been at for a few years now, is how do we start replacing specifically vendors and vendor products with microservices that we could control and that we could customize. Because I can't tell you how many times we stood up a service, or our central IT has stood up a service, and some people, it solves like the needs of maybe 40%. And then somebody will say, can you add this package, like Jupyter Notebooks? Could you add this package? And it's like, well, we can't, we can't add it just for you. So I think that the technology has evolved to a place where that stuff is sustainable. You can release custom pieces of functionality and services at scale, and you can do it sustainably. So I guess the question is, how would we approach that? And in my mind, there's two pieces of functionality that web components could control, and those are microservices and functions as a service. And I think that those serve two similar but different pieces, and they have both advantages and disadvantages. But I think they complement each other so well that we could replace a ton of existing pieces of functionality that we have in like our existing LMSs. Is everybody from the higher ed space here?
No, what do you mean say LMS?
What's that?
What do you mean?
Okay, learning management system.
Okay.
So
like
CMS, but
Sakai and Blackboard
yeah,
and that kind of stuff.
yeah. So we have Canvas at Penn State. So I think it's important to define like the difference in my mind is microservices could be a multi-functioned app. So something that has maybe state, maybe something that has custom user roles and groups, maybe that even has its own UI, something out of the box, something like Jupyter Hub or RStudio, or maybe like a discussion app that you can go get that's open source. Anything that you could put inside of a container and just spin it up on demand and point a URL to it. That to me is a microservice. And functions as a service have no UI, they have no state, it's just input output. I send you something, I send you a string of some sort and you give me a string back, right? And I think that is very powerful tied to web components, because web components can be that front end for input output. And I can show an example here. So Code Academy. So have you ever used Code Academy, where you go and they give you like a little lesson of write some HTML. You write the HTML and then it processes it on the background and shows it to you like in a browser. That would be like a functions as a service piece. So the web component would know how to take the string of HTML, process it on the background, and get like a picture or something from this microservice. Like it's a very discrete process. Whereas something like, has anyone played with Data Camp? So let me log in. Actually, DataCamp has examples of both, I think. Oh, no. Let's see. Okay. So this would be an example of a microservice. So I refresh the page. It says loading a Jupyter Notebook. In the background, I get my own entire instance of Jupyter Notebook. So it's not just a Jupyter Notebook isn't a discrete functionality. It's this whole monolith that is specific for me that they spun up. So I can complete this assignment. If I'm an instructor, I can put custom assignments in there, custom packages that are specific to my needs that won't interfere with anybody else's classes. So that, to me, is the difference between functions as a service and microservices. But I think web components could control both of those. So I think the way that, how do we get this out into our courses? How do we get it into our websites? And maintain sanity, I think, is the web components piece. So if we instruct web components how to basically own these microservices or functions as a service. So I'm going to tell the web component where this service is located and maybe some user input or something like that. And the web component itself will know how to interact with that service. So that's the only thing that you're interfacing with whenever you implement this is the web component. So as an example, I'll just go to the site. I have this example website here, and I have this rcoder web component. And rcoder has a, I forget what the name of the web component is, but it's VS Code in a web component, all right? So what rcoder does is it gives you some input. So here's some R code, and it says add these two together. Say print A plus B. Hit process, and then it processes that functionality. So that's processing R code somewhere. So that is processing it in a function, not a microservice. And to implement that, it would be, oops, let me zoom in. Okay, it would be that. So this is what makes up that page. So I just use the rcoder tag. Rcoder knows where the function, the rcoder service lives, and it allows you to define some setup code. But it has all the functionality of giving it user input. The user types something, they hit process. It knows how to concatenate what they just wrote, send it to the rcoder. Rcoder comes back with a response. Actually, if I look in the network, refresh that. Okay, so we see that came back from this R service here. And this is the response. It was just a string. Okay. So now let's take a look at what a microservice example could be. I have this project that I've been working away on called Containers on Demand. And I think it's located at that. Okay. So Containers on Demand is this little process that would run in a Docker environment of some type. So it's listening for a call that will instruct it, hey, spin up this container. This is the image I want you to spin up. This is maybe a repo that I would like you to clone in to this container once it starts up. and then it will send back a URL for someone to access it. Okay, and so the web component, it doesn't know a whole lot. I mean, it knows about the service. It knows what parameters to send it. Come on, Zish. Okay, so this is the containers on-demand component. Wants to know about an endpoint, where the host is, so to put together the URL that will become the final URL. What image do you want to spin up? What path do you want to send somebody to once this container spins up? What port? Repo, any environment variables, some basic auth if you would like that, and then some information on what do you want the button to say. And so there's not a lot to this component, but
Did you publish the component to NPM?
not in this case, since this is just a demo. I just have it right alongside the index file here.
You're using Pika Web there?
Yep. Which I love. And so what you get is the data camp experience, where you don't have to leave the site. This web component will dynamically figure out exactly what you want to load, spin up a brand new environment with the image, and then come back with a URL, and it will display it in like an iframe. Okay, so this is happening all in place.
That's really neat. But so the web component really is is it correct to say you're basically passing the needed parameters to a service that is able to spin up the Docker?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And the reason why I think that they go together so well is that there is this well-defined API with web components that you can maintain at scale. So you can put these services out there that know how to spin up, know how to do this complex processing and figuring out exactly what to do. But for the user endpoint, this is all the tag is. Whenever you go to implement it, tag is just that. And you can even abstract that even more. I mean, you wouldn't want, I wouldn't want faculty to know how to do this. I mean, some faculty, yeah, like Dave can do this. But let's say that I don't have a power user and they say, well, I want to teach assignments out of Jupyter Notebook and RStudio. I'll put together those two and have a web component that is, Dave Fusco -Jupyter -notebook, that tag. You put that tag there. Maybe I can instruct him where to point, where his assignment is located. Lots of people use GitHubs just to host their assignments, so I could teach him how to point it there, and the web component would control figuring everything out. Okay, and Dave's web component under the hood, so it would be like Fusco Elms service. So he's teaching a course, about HAX-CMS, let's say, or Elms LN.
Yeah, just functions as shortcode.
Right. Yep. So underneath, I would just expose like where the assignment is located. Right. Something like that. So yeah, anything with a UI, anything with multiple endpoints, I think would be in the microservice category. So like here's using Shiny apps. Do you guys use Shiny apps at all? Yes, so Tom does. So Shiny does have, it kind of falls in between, because really like it could just have, you give me some data, I'll output a picture, or it could be you give me data and I'll export this like whole web page or something. So it could be both. So here would be spin up a new HAX-CMS server. as a web component, which would be pretty crazy because then you could spin up a HAX CMS server to author a site, to put down a component, to author containers, to author a HAX CMS server, which would author a site. It would go on and on and on. So yeah, that's what I've been working on so far, and that's where my head's at, like with the microservice approach.
Along the same line, I think what you're doing is really interesting. I just went to we had a little, we're starting to use Docker. Actually, we're working with Red Hat and starting to use Docker. And, they explain how a Docker image, you can have a Docker image that has MySQL, and then you can start with that and add on things. You sort of have an extension hierarchy, which is actually similar to web components. And it's like you could have like a one-to-one mapping between a web component and a Docker image. That I guess as you add more features, you need to pass in more information as far as how to start it out, like ports.
Right. That's a good idea. Like having a definitive mapping between this image and this web component. Yeah. So whenever you build on the image, you could extend the web component to match that exact version of the image. Yeah. How many people have worked with Docker or container stuff? Does this approach sound doable, maintainable?
I'm just a little confused as to what's happening. So you use a web component to get all the inputs to make a call to a microservice. The microservice is like a known repository of whatever type. That repository, whatever, has a way of running itself in a Docker container. You spin up a Docker container and load the contents of that kind of starting project into an iframe on the page?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to be sure I got them.
Yeah, and like loading an iframe, you could take them somewhere else. I don't know. It would be whatever workflow you wanted. Like as an example, if you were teaching like a code course straight out of GitHub, and you had this little service running, you could have a web component on maybe like the README page. So RStudio example assignment. So here is the entire assignment here. And with each assignment, it has a Docker file. And so this would be, I need to know what infrastructure to run this. And so I'm forking from the basic one, and I'm installing a specific package for this assignment, cleaning up some permissions, and then I'm just presenting a link to my students. So open this assignment in a container, click it, and it does all the back-end magic to spin this assignment up in a container. Yeah.
How much does this cost you? Because, like, for example, like an RStudio license, Shiny license, and stuff like that, I think it will cost whoever's running it, I should say. It's about like $300 per month, almost.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, right? It's a lot of money. So how like, and there's also limitations to how many students can access like RStudio or Shiny.
Right.
There's also, besides the cost and resources and stuff like that, how does this reflect? Because I know like containers kind of mitigate that cost a little bit, but how much will like it cost you to run a semester of your like containerized RStudio?
Yeah, we are lucky at Penn State because the cost of requesting a new server or getting a server with pretty beefy resources from our internal VM host provider is like dirt cheap. So running our entire Elm stack on like a $20 a month plan, and it's like beefed up. And so by using the open source version of RStudio and not the managed console and everything, and just allowing Docker to mitigate that. It's totally free, right? So if you're good at Docker, then you could probably run it at infinite scale.
Yeah.
Well, like if you have AWS hosting and stuff like that, yeah, the performance is way better because you can have like like with RStudio as an example, in some of the instructions now, it's go to an RStudio that is centrally supported, and maybe you have to install Mosaic, right? So you have to hit, I forget how to install packages on this. Maybe I have to install this. I forget how to install, but it might take like 2 or 3 minutes to download that whole package that each student has to go through. That's something that could be done at build time whenever you're creating the assignment. So whenever the student is ready to take the assignment, it's instantaneous. Like that stuff's all set up.
So I'm curious if and how you can pass data between the microservice and the rendering page, right? So can you pass state information between the microservice?
That is an excellent question. So that would be a clear difference of microservices compared to functions as a service. Because with microservices, at least in the way that I'm presenting, like where you have an open source project that you're just stuffing into a container, there's still a lot of black box magic that's happening in there. So I would have to know how to go into Jupyter Notebook and hook into when the interactions are happening.
You have to have some kind of an API reference to the instance of that container, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Or that particular Jupyter service.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, that would be a good question of, okay, well, what if we think about putting some little proxy in between each one, like a standard proxy in between each one of these services that can glean some type of standard information on what's happening. I don't know.
Yeah, you'd have to have a listener for each, a proxy listener for all your
right.
services.
Yeah. So whereas that's a huge benefit as functions as a service in my mind, because so let's say that they're using RStudio to just play around and write some code in R. Well, we could change that into a function where we put a web component there, like this R coder thing, and we say, hey, play around and write some R code, and the web component would track everything that's happening. Like the web component would be able to negotiate with this function as a service to say, hey, did the user get it right or wrong? Like, what is the right answer to this specific problem? That could be information that the web component knows about. So, yeah. And so the process would be the web component knows how to verify with the function that's running R. Hey, did the person get 45 at the end? Right? Did the user get this right or wrong? And so the server sends back, the user got this right. The web component knows how to emit user data to say this user got it right. And so then it's the question of, okay, well, you need a standard, like a bunch of web components that understand what normalized analytics are. So like that, this R coder knows how to say the user is this, they got this right, they got this value, and it's all structured exactly the same, which is a huge benefit of web components because you could roll out web components that all understand the same schema.
You can make whole exams with this.
Yeah. And that's
like learning modules.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
When would you say, how do you make the decision between should this be a function as a service or a microservice approach?
Yeah, I would say that first, okay, what are you trying to do? Well, I want students to learn R. Well, how are you doing that now? I have this R service.
Mhm.
And then taking a look at what the exact assignments are and what they're actually using it for. If they're using pieces of functionality from RStudio, which they very well might, then you would say, okay, well, we'll at least allow you to spin this up on demand for every student. Now, the other realm of this is how do you submit these? Okay, so if we're using these as assignments, how do you submit them? And the two ways that you could do it are via Git. So we're specifying I want RStudio, and I'm sending them a link to the repository, and the service knows how to go out and get the repository and bring it back. So it can start making commits on behalf of that user. So it could submit that way. Or, which I've seen some demos of other people doing this, is you just submit, you save the container, and you submit a link to the container so that the instructor can spin up the container and take a look at the student's work. And that would be something like in the arts, if you're teaching Photoshop or something, you could have an instance of either Photoshop or something similar, where it's like at the end of the day, art students they can only submit a JPEG of their work.
Sure.
But now with this, they could submit their entire workspace as an assignment.
That's incredibly portable.
Right.
So definitionally, I mean, I guess I've been struggling with it. We've been using web services, RESTful web services for many, many years. And people are now using this phrase microservice. And I've been waiting for a coherent definition. Like, is this web service we have a microservice? What you gave a coherent definition, which I wonder if it's uniform. You're basically saying any web service running in Docker is a microservice?
No, that's a great question, because that would be my personal definition of microservices that I gave earlier, which would be, I guess, yes, I am defining it as something that can run in a container. I guess it doesn't have to, but it could be a central service. Like if you had something that was supported that had a really good API that you purchased, let's say like Canvas has a good API that we get locked out of, but let's say you didn't, you could have web components that you distribute that know how to communicate back with the Canvas API. So that would be, I guess that wouldn't be a microservice. Yeah, I'm talking myself out of that.
I mean, I also heard the definition of, but a microservice can go to multiple databases, a single service, or is it always supposed to go to like one?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
It can go to multiple. Yeah. Yep. So for one, it can have a database, and two, it could hit potentially multiple databases. So this 2019 HAX-Camp. So this is made up of a HAX-CMS OAuth microservice and a HAX-CMS on-demand microservice. Each one of those services has its own Postgres database. Each one of those services has a GraphQL server that's sitting on it, and then each one has an Nginx server to do the front end. And so what that would look like is so if you're familiar with Docker Compose, or if you're not familiar with it, it's a way for you to orchestrate multiple containers that are networked together. So I have a proxy that's called traffic that is routing all the traffic to all the different services and URLs that are spun up. So this app is the front end, and it's running in Nginx. And the server here, that's the GraphQL server. It knows how to communicate with the OAuth service. And yeah, it has a Postgres database. And so there's also an OAuth service that it knows how to talk to, obviously. But yeah, it could be multiple databases. Whereas the functions as a service is just I/O, and the idea is that you could possibly string multiple functions together to get what you want. So the function this is the solution that I am steering towards for the functions as a service. It's called FaaS. And basically, I just wanted something that was truly open, no vendor tie-in, even though it's Amazon and it's everything. I didn't want to be tied to that. And this is, I've been keeping up with this project for a long time. And this is what is easiest to get into, makes the most sense to me, has a good community behind it. So there's a lot of documentation on, hey, if you're running a swarm, run these few commands and you have this open FaaS functions as a service. And here's the CLI where you can easily create a function and easily deploy it to this functions as a service, which you can also deploy microservices to it if you want to get really confused. Which not a lot of existing functions as a service providers allow. So this is, I think, what the next step of deploying these functions. And the cool thing with these is you can, the whole point of functions as a service is it can scale up and down like super easily, right? And it can even scale to 0, so you're not using any resources if nobody's using it. And that's what a lot of people are very interested in. So there's lots of articles about people showing how to run really complex, really hyper-functional apps totally for free. Because like you get these functions as a service plans that are like, hey, under 10,000 users, it's free. It's like, oh, and you can push anything there. So you push your front end there, you push all your back end infrastructure there totally for free.
I mean, most of our services which were not called microservices, which we did for years and years, none of them have state. So I guess one could say they're functions of the service, but the big difference that you just set out is we have servers sitting there idle, nobody's calling them, they're sitting there idle waiting. But you're saying if nobody's using them, they shut down, and if there are millions of users, suddenly
right.
you create all these little Docker to handle the load. That's what's, I guess, the biggest difference I'd see.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the way that you compose them is they're easily able to compose together. Yeah. Yeah. Which is the benefit. So if you have a function that's like render HTML to PDF, a function that takes a PDF and makes it accessible, a function that makes it OCR, so it pulls the text back out of it, you know, you could string that whole process together.